Sheriff, this is your residence? She weaponized law enforcement over a parking dispute. Brenda Carmichael, you're under arrest for filing a false police report.
There's a special kind of nightmare that comes with moving into a neighborhood run by a power-hungry HOA. But when our busybody president decided to SWAT my house over a parking dispute, she made one fatal miscalculation. The woman she tried to have arrested was the actual county sheriff. We closed on our house in Whispering Pines just as the spring weather was starting to turn warm. My wife, Jessica, and I had spent the last 7 years grinding away in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, saving every penny we could. I work from home as a senior software engineer for a cybersecurity firm, which means I spend most of my days staring at monitors in sweatpants. Jessica, on the other hand, has a slightly more demanding career. Just 3 months before we moved, Jessica had won a fiercely contested election to become the sheriff of Monroe County. At 35, she was the youngest person and the first woman to ever hold the position in our district. She had spent the previous decade working her way up from patrol deputy to detective and finally to captain. The election had been grueling, filled with debates, town halls, and endless handshaking. When she finally won, she made me promise her one thing. Our new home was going to be her sanctuary. She didn't want to bring the badge, the politics, or the stress through the front door. Because she wanted to maintain a strict boundary between her public life and our private lives, she rarely wore her uniform to and from the house. She preferred plain clothes, usually jeans, and a hoodie, changing into her formal uniform only when absolutely necessary at headquarters. To the casual observer, she just looked like a busy professional who worked wildly unpredictable hours. When we first met our immediate neighbors, she introduced herself simply as a county employee. It wasn't a lie, just an omission of the terrifying amount of authority she actually wielded. Whispering Pines was supposed to be our oasis. It was an upscale, quiet subdivision with manicured lawns, mature oak trees, and a community pool. But we quickly learned that this pristine environment came at a heavy, suffocating cost. Enter Brenda Carmichael. Brenda was the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, and she treated the position as if she had been anointed by God himself to rule over the subdivision. She was in her early 60s, a retired corporate HR director who clearly missed the thrill of micromanaging people's lives. She patrolled the neighborhood twice a day in a custom beige golf cart equipped with a flashing yellow light, carrying a clipboard, a digital camera, and an actual retractable measuring tape. We hadn't even finished unpacking the moving truck before Brenda made her first appearance. I was carrying a heavy box of kitchen appliances up the driveway when the beige golf cart silently rolled to a stop at the curb. Brenda stepped out, adjusting her oversized designer sunglasses. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't say, "Welcome to the neighborhood." She simply pointed a manicured finger at the moving truck. "You have until 6 p.m. to have that commercial vehicle removed from the premises," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of artificial sweetness that makes your teeth hurt. Section 3. Paragraph A of the bylaws clearly states that moving vehicles cannot remain overnight. If it's here at 6 to 1, you'll be fined $200. I blinked, shifting the heavy box in my arms. "Hi, I'm David. We're the new owners of number 42. We'll be done unloading in a couple of hours." "I'm Brenda Carmichael, HOA president," she replied, not breaking eye contact. "See that you are. We have standards to maintain here, David." She climbed back into her cart and zipped away. I brushed it off as a mildly annoying encounter, assuming she was just overzealous. I was completely wrong. That was only the opening salvo in what would become a daily campaign of harassment. Over the next 6 weeks, Brenda made it her personal mission to ensure I knew my place. Because I worked from home, I was the one who had to deal with her constant barrage of petty citations. I received a warning letter because my trash cans were left on the curb for exactly 45 minutes past the allowed retrieval time. I received another notice because the grass near our mailbox was exceeding the maximum allowed height of 2.5 inches, a measurement she had physically taken with her tape measure while I was watching from my home office window. But Brenda's real issue wasn't the grass or the trash cans. Her real issue was my wife. Because Jessica worked odd shifts, sometimes leaving the house at 3 in the morning for a critical incident, or coming home at noon on a Tuesday looking utterly exhausted, Brenda's active imagination kicked into overdrive. Brenda was a woman who demanded to know everything about everyone. My polite evasion of her nosy questions only fueled her suspicion. One afternoon, while I was pulling weeds in the front flower bed, Brenda ambushed me. "I notice your wife is rarely around, David," she pried, leaning over my pristine white picket fence, "and when she is, she's keeping very strange hours, leaving in the middle of the night. It's highly disruptive to the community." "She works on call for the county, Brenda," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Sometimes emergencies happen." "Emergencies," Brenda scoffed, clearly not believing a word of it. "Well, whatever she does, she needs to learn to close the car doors more quietly at 3 a.m. And frankly, her attitude is lacking. I waved to her yesterday and she completely ignored me." "She was probably just tired," I replied, suppressing the urge to point out that Jessica had literally been awake for 36 hours managing the fallout of a multi-agency drug bust. "In Whispering Pines, we value community," Brenda sniffed. "Your wife seems to think she's above the rules and above being neighborly. I'm keeping an eye on both of you." I smiled tightly and went back to pulling weeds. I didn't tell Jessica about that specific conversation. She was dealing with county budgets, staffing shortages at the jail, and a spike in local property crimes. The last thing she needed to hear was that the neighborhood hall monitor thought she had a bad attitude. But Brenda's passive-aggressive comments were about to evolve into aggressive, direct action, and it was all going to center around a piece of state property. By our third month in Whispering Pines, the tension with the HOA had escalated from annoying to unbearable. Brenda had enlisted the help of her HOA vice president, a man named Gary Linus. Gary was a retired accountant who treated Brenda like a commanding general, following her around in his own golf cart and taking aggressive notes on his phone whenever they spotted a violation. The breaking point arrived in late July, and it came in the form of a 6,000-pound piece of county-issued machinery. As the newly elected sheriff, Jessica was required to be available to respond to major crime scenes and tactical situations at a moment's notice. The county fleet manager finally finished outfitting her new command vehicle and delivered it to the department. It was a brand new, jet black Chevy Tahoe. It had municipal-exempt license plates, deeply tinted windows, and hidden LED emergency lights integrated into the grille and the windshield. To a normal person, it just looked like a very clean, intimidating black SUV. To Brenda Carmichael, it was an act of war. Our garage was a standard two-car setup. My sedan occupied one side, and the other side was completely taken up by my woodworking equipment, my one hobby that got me away from computer screens. Because of this, Jessica had to park the Tahoe in our wide, completely paved driveway. The first morning the Tahoe was parked there, I was brewing coffee in the kitchen when I saw the flashing yellow light of Brenda's golf cart reflect off the kitchen window. I sighed, set my mug down, and walked to the front door. Brenda and Gary were standing in my driveway, circling the Tahoe like vultures. Gary was taking photos from every conceivable angle, while Brenda was aggressively peeling the backing off a massive neon green sticker. Before I could even open the door, she slapped the sticker directly onto the driver's side window, pressing it down firmly so the cheap adhesive would bond with the glass. I threw the front door open. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Brenda turned, an expression of smug triumph on her face. "Enforcing the rules, David. Section 4, Paragraph B. No commercial, fleet, or livery vehicles are permitted to be parked in driveways or on the street overnight. They must be stored in a closed garage." "It's an SUV, Brenda," I argued, walking down the steps. "It's a passenger vehicle. It has municipal plates, no dealer frames, and aftermarket modifications," Gary chimed in, adjusting his glasses. "It's a fleet vehicle, and it's an eyesore. It looks like a gangster car." "It is a county-issued vehicle," I said, trying to scrape the edge of the neon sticker with my thumbnail. It wouldn't budge, and slapping vandalism stickers on it is crossing a line. "That sticker is official HOA correspondence," Brenda fired back. "You have 24 hours to remove this monstrosity from the property, or we will have it towed at your expense. And don't think I won't do it. I have the towing company on speed dial." Just then, the front door opened again. Jessica stepped out. She had just woken up after a grueling night shift. She was wearing gray sweatpants, a plain white t-shirt, and her hair was tied up in a messy bun. She was holding her heavy black nylon duty belt in one hand, though from Brenda's angle, it just looked like a black duffel bag strap getting ready to load it into the vehicle for her afternoon shift. Jessica walked over, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Gary holding his camera, Brenda looking smug, and the massive, impossible-to-remove neon green sticker plastered over her driver's side window. "What is this?" Jessica asked, her voice dropping an octave. The sheriff voice. I had only heard it a few times, usually when she was on the phone with an uncooperative deputy. It commanded absolute, immediate obedience. Gary actually took a half-step back, but Brenda stood her ground, puffing out her chest. "It's a violation notice, sweetheart," Brenda sneered, emphasizing the pet name to be as condescending as possible. "Your husband clearly doesn't know how to read the rule book. You can't park your little company car here. We don't allow fleet vehicles in Whispering Pines." Jessica looked at the sticker, then back at Brenda. "This is an emergency response vehicle. It is explicitly exempt from neighborhood HOA regulations under State Statute 45B, which dictates that emergency personnel are permitted to park their issued vehicles at their primary residence regardless of local bylaws." Brenda let out a loud, theatrical bark of laughter. "Oh, please! Emergency personnel? What do? Deliver the mail for the county in a rush. You're not an ambulance, and you're certainly not a police officer. I know all the local officers in this precinct. I am very good friends with the chief of police for this municipality. Don't try to cite fake laws to me. I am politely asking you not to touch this vehicle again," Jessica said, her tone icy and measured. "The adhesive you just used can damage the tinting on this window. If you touch this county property again, there will be consequences." "Are you threatening me?" Brenda gasped, clutching the pearls at her neck. She looked at Gary. "Did you hear that, Gary? She just threatened the HOA president." "I heard it," Gary squeaked. "It wasn't a threat. It was a warning," Jessica said, walking past Brenda and opening the rear door of the Tahoe to toss her gear inside. She turned back to Brenda. "Now, please leave our property." Brenda's face turned a mottled shade of red. Her authority had never been openly challenged like this, let alone dismissed so casually. She marched right up to Jessica, invading her personal space. "Listen here, little girl," Brenda hissed. "You don't know who you're messing with. I run this neighborhood. I decide who stays and who goes. You think you can just move in here, flout the rules, and talk down to me? I'm going to make your life a living hell. I'm going to fine you until you have to sell this house. And if that car is still here tomorrow morning, I'm calling my friends at the police department and having it impounded." Jessica just stared at her, not with anger, but with the profound, exhausting pity of someone who deals with criminals, sociopaths, and maniacs on a daily basis. "Call whoever you need to call, Brenda," Jessica said softly. "But get off my driveway." Brenda spun on her heel, storming back to her golf cart with Gary scurrying right behind her. As they drove away, Brenda was already aggressively tapping away on her cell phone. Jessica looked at the neon green sticker, let out a deep sigh, and looked at me. "Do we have any goo gone in the garage?" "Yeah," I said, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "You think she's actually going to call the cops?" "Let her," Jessica said, a tiny, almost invisible smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. "I think the patrol guys could use a good laugh." We didn't know it yet, but Brenda was planning something far more vicious than just a parking complaint. She wasn't just going to call the local PD to write a tick. The morning after the sticker incident, the retaliation began. I walked out to grab the mail and found our mailbox stuffed with 3 separate certified letters from the Whispering Pines HOA. They had expedited the delivery just to make a point. I stood in the driveway, holding my coffee, and ripped open the envelopes. The first was a formal reprimand for abusive language directed at community leaders. The second was a notice of a $500 fine for unauthorized parking of a commercial fleet vehicle. The third was a cease and desist letter from a local attorney, Robert L. Harrison, at the Harrison and Associates firm in downtown, threatening legal action if we continued to harass Brenda Carmichael. It was utterly unhinged. I took a picture of the letters and texted them to Jessica with the caption, "Looks like we're public enemy number 1." Her reply came 3 minutes later. file them in the trash. I'm in meetings all day with the county commissioners. For the next 2 weeks, Gary, Linus, and Brenda essentially set up camp near our property. Because I work for CrowdStrike managing remote enterprise security systems, I spend a lot of time monitoring feeds and data. I naturally applied this to my own home by installing a comprehensive Ring security camera network around the perimeter of our house. The footage I captured was both hilarious and deeply disturbing. Gary would creep up to our property line at odd hours, sometimes at 6 in the morning, sometimes at twilight, and literally use a pair of Bushnell hunting binoculars to peer into our garage windows. Brenda would park her golf cart at the end of our cul-de-sac, logging the exact times Jessica left for work and when she returned. They were building a dossier. The problem for Brenda was that she still had absolutely no idea what Jessica actually did for a living. Because Jessica usually left in her plain clothes and changed at the precinct, Brenda only saw a woman keeping bizarre hours, driving a menacing black SUV with government plates, and occasionally carrying heavy, black nylon tactical bags into the house. In Brenda's twisted, true crime-obsessed mind, there was only one logical conclusion. We were running some kind of illegal operation. The breaking point happened on a sweltering Friday evening in August. Jessica had just wrapped up a brutal 72-hour week. A major organized retail theft ring had been operating across 3 counties, and her department had finally executed the arrest warrants. She came home around 6 in the evening, parked the Tahoe in the driveway, and practically collapsed onto the living room sofa. She was wearing her standard off-duty attire, faded blue jeans, and a plain gray hooded sweatshirt. She had brought her duty belt, her county-issued Glock 17, and her Level 3 EA Kevlar vest into the house, dropping the heavy gear bags near the front door. We ordered pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and turned on the television. For the first time in weeks, we felt completely relaxed. The house was quiet. The neighborhood was still. At exactly 8:45 p.m., that peace was shattered by the sound of screeching tires. I frowned, pausing the movie. We lived on a quiet street where the speed limit was strictly enforced by the HOA's constant whining. I stood up and walked toward the front window, peeling back the blinds just an inch to look outside. My heart instantly dropped into my stomach. There were 4 marked police cruisers from the local municipal police department parked at chaotic, angled positions across our front lawn and driveway, effectively blocking in Jessica's Tahoe. The cruiser doors were already open. Officers were pouring out, and they weren't approaching casually. They were moving tactically, drawing their service weapons and using their car doors for cover. "Jess," I whispered, the blood draining from my face. "Jess, get up." "What is it?" she asked, her tone instantly shifting from exhausted wife to alert law enforcement officer. She swung her legs off the sofa and hurried to my side. She looked through the blinds. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. More sirens were wailing in the distance, growing louder by the second. 2 more cruisers arrived, jumping the curb. One of the officers was retrieving a heavy tactical rifle from the trunk of his car. "What the hell is going on?" I panicked, my voice trembling. "Why are the cops here? Did the alarm trigger?" "No," Jessica said, her voice eerily calm as she analyzed the tactical deployment unfolding on our lawn. "They're setting up a hard perimeter. They're treating this as an active, high-threat situation. Someone called in a major emergency." "A major emergency?" I stammered. "We're eating pepperoni pizza." Before I could say anything else, a deafening voice echoed from a police megaphone outside. "Occupants of number 42. This is the police. Come out with your hands empty and visible. Do it now." Jessica pulled out her cell phone and immediately dialed the local municipal dispatch. While it rang, she looked back out the window. Across the street, standing safely behind a massive oak tree on her perfectly manicured lawn, was Brenda Carmichael. She was clutching her cell phone, watching the chaos with an expression of absolute, terrifying glee. Gary was standing right beside her, practically bouncing on his heels. "Brenda," Jessica muttered softly, her jaw clenching. The local dispatcher answered the phone. 911, what is your emergency? "This is Sheriff Jessica Miller, Monroe County," Jessica snapped, her voice carrying that undeniable authority. I am currently inside the residence at number 42 Whispering Pines Drive. Your municipal officers are currently pointing loaded weapons at my house. Connect me to the watch commander immediately. Sheriff? The dispatcher stammered, clearly caught off guard. Hold on, patching you through to Lieutenant Hayes. While we waited, the megaphone blared again, louder and more urgent. I repeat, come out with your hands up. If you do not comply, we will breach the residence. They're not going to wait, Jessica said, hanging up the phone. She turned to me, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. David, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not move. Keep your hands out of your pockets. Let me handle this. The flashing red and blue lights painted our living room walls in frantic, strobing patterns. My heart was hammering so hard against my ribs I thought it might crack them. I had never had a gun pointed at me in my life, let alone half a dozen. Jess, this is insane, I whispered, watching as a heavily armored officer moved up the side of our property line, taking cover behind our trash enclosures. They think we're criminals. I know what they think, Jessica said, her voice steady and clinical. She was in full command mode now. Brenda swatted us. She called in a fake threat to get them out here. Just stay behind the wall. Jessica took a deep breath, smoothing down her gray hoodie. She didn't reach for her duty belt or her badge case, which was sitting on the console table. Reaching into a pocket during a high-tension police standoff is the fastest way to get shot. She knew the protocol better than anyone outside that door. She raised both her hands high in the air, fingers splayed wide, and walked out of the living room into the front hallway. I'm opening the door, Jessica shouted, her voice booming through the heavy oak. My hands are empty. I am coming out. I peeked through the side window, my breath fogging the glass, terrified of what I was about to witness. Jessica pushed the front door open with her foot and stepped out onto the porch into the blazing beams of 3 police spotlights. She didn't flinch. She kept her hands raised, her face completely stoic. Stop right there, the lead officer yelled from behind his cruiser door. He had his sidearm leveled directly at her chest. Keep your hands up. Turn around and walk backwards towards the sound of my voice. Officers, listen to me very carefully, Jessica projected, her voice carrying over the idling engines of the police cruisers. She didn't follow the command to turn around. My name is Jessica Miller. I am the elected sheriff of Monroe County. You are currently aiming your weapons at my primary residence. My husband is inside, unarmed. The vehicle in the driveway is a county-issued command vehicle. There was a sudden, heavy silence, broken only by the crackle of police radios. Do not move, the lead officer shouted, though his voice wavered slightly. The absolute confidence in Jessica's tone was throwing him off. Criminals usually panic, yell, or freeze. They don't calmly issue counter-information with tactical precision. Just then, an unmarked silver sedan tore into the cul-de-sac, throwing itself into park with a screech. A man in a suit and a tactical vest threw open the door and jogged out. It was Lieutenant Hayes, the local municipal watch commander. Jessica had just spoken to his dispatcher moments ago. Hold fire! Stand down! Lieutenant Hayes barked, waving his arms at his officers. He jogged up the driveway, squinting into the glare of his own spotlights. He looked at Jessica, standing on the porch in her sweatpants and hoodie with her hands up. Lieutenant Hayes stopped dead in his tracks. All the color drained from his face. Sheriff? Hayes asked, his voice cracking. Evening, Lieutenant, Jessica said calmly, finally lowering her hands. I appreciate the rapid response time, but I believe there has been a severe miscommunication. The officers behind the cruisers looked at each other in total bewilderment. Slowly, awkwardly, they began to lower their weapons. The tension in the air evaporated, replaced instantly by a thick, suffocating wave of professional embarrassment. Sheriff Miller, we had no idea this was your address, Lieutenant Hayes stammered, frantically gesturing for his officers to holster their weapons and cut the spotlights. Dispatch received a frantic 911 call from a neighbor. They reported a domestic hostage situation, illegal narcotics distribution, and claimed heavily armed individuals were seen loading military bags into a suspicious black vehicle. Jessica crossed her arms, leaning against the porch railing. Let me guess. A female caller? Older voice? Very concerned about the neighborhood? Yes, ma'am, Hayes said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. She gave us her name, Brenda Carmichael. She said she was the HOA president and that she had been surveilling your house for weeks. She said she personally witnessed you carrying assault rifles inside. Jessica let out a dry, humorless chuckle. She pointed to the black nylon bag sitting just inside the open front door. My level 3 EA vest and my duty belt. That's what she saw. I finally stepped out onto the porch, my knees shaking. Lieutenant Hayes looked at me, then back at Jessica, looking like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Sheriff, I am so incredibly sorry, Hayes said, looking at the squad cars tearing up our front lawn. We have to respond to threats like that with maximum force. Protocol. I know the protocol, Lieutenant. I wrote the manual for the county. Jessica interrupted gently. You did your jobs. You responded to the intelligence you were given. Your men executed a clean perimeter. No one got hurt. She paused, and her eyes drifted across the street. Brenda and Gary were still standing under the oak tree. The smug, victorious grins had completely vanished from their faces. From their vantage point, they couldn't hear the conversation, but they could see the weapons being put away. They could see the watch commander apologizing profusely to the woman they thought was a hardened criminal. However, Jessica continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. Filing a false police report is a misdemeanor. Swatting a residence, which deliberately places law enforcement officers and civilians in imminent danger of deadly force, is a felony under state law. Lieutenant Hayes followed her gaze across the street. He saw Brenda clutching her pearls, looking suddenly very small and very terrified. Hayes's expression hardened. No cop likes being used as a personal attack dog, especially when it almost results in them shooting their own county sheriff. Yes, ma'am, it certainly is a felony, Hayes agreed, his voice thick with anger. Officer Mitchell, one of the patrol officers jogged over. Yes, sir? Go secure the witness across the street. The one who made the 911 call, Hayes ordered. Sir? Officer Mitchell asked, confused. The woman in the beige cardigan, Hayes pointed directly at Brenda. Arrest her. Officer Mitchell nodded, his face a mask of strict, professional stoicism. He gestured to his partner, and the two of them began a brisk, purposeful march across the manicured asphalt of the cul-de-sac, their boots crunching loudly in the quiet night. Brenda watched them approach. At first, she adjusted her posture, pulling her beige cardigan tight and adopting the imperious stance of a concerned citizen about to be thanked for her tireless vigilance. She even managed a tight, self-satisfied smile, expecting them to ask for her statement. Officers, Brenda called out as they stepped onto her pristine, perfectly measured grass. Finally! Did you find the drugs? I told dispatch they were hiding. Brenda Carmichael? Officer Mitchell interrupted, his voice flat and carrying clearly in the humid night air. Yes, of course, Brenda sniffed, pointing a manicured finger across the street toward our house. Now, I expect a full, detailed report on what you found in that dreadful vehicle. I am the president. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back, Officer Mitchell said calmly, drawing a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. The metallic clink of the cuffs was the loudest sound in the neighborhood. Brenda froze. The smug smile slid completely off her face, replaced by a mask of sheer, uncomprehending horror. Excuse me? I am the one who called you. I am the victim here. I am the president of this homeowners association. You're being placed under arrest for filing a false police report and the malicious misuse of the 911 emergency system, Mitchell stated, stepping firmly into her personal space and grasping her elbow. Get your hands off me! Brenda shrieked, suddenly thrashing against his grip, her carefully styled hair falling into her eyes. Gary! Gary! Tell them! Tell them what we saw! Tell them about the guns! But Gary Linus, the loyal vice president and faithful lackey, was already in full retreat. He was backing away slowly, dropping his precious digital camera onto the grass. His hands were raised in total surrender, and he was shaking his head violently. I didn't see anything. I told you not to call, Brenda. I told you it was a bad idea. I have a heart condition. I want absolutely no part of this. Gary turned and practically sprinted down the sidewalk toward his own house, his leather loafers slapping loudly against the pavement, abandoning his general on the battlefield. Brenda was left completely alone under the massive oak tree that had been her command post. "I know, Chief Davidson," Brenda screamed, desperately trying to pull her arm away as Officer Mitchell expertly spun her around and pinned her wrists together. "I play tennis with his wife. When he hears about this, you will all be fired. Every single one of you." At that moment, Jessica walked across the street. She didn't march. She didn't hurry. She merely strolled, her hands casually tucked into the pockets of her gray hoodie. Lieutenant Hayes walked a few paces behind her, acting as a silent, imposing bodyguard. Jessica stopped a few feet from Brenda, who was now bent over the hood of a patrol car, her hands securely cuffed behind her back. Several neighbors had emerged from their houses by now. The Jenkins family from number 46, who had been heavily fined for leaving a child's tricycle on their porch, were openly pointing. Mr. Henderson, who had been cited 3 times for his exterior paint color, was actually slow clapping from his driveway. "Chief Davidson is an exceptionally good man," Jessica said quietly, her voice effortlessly cutting through Brenda's hysterical sobbing. "In fact, I just had lunch with him on Tuesday to discuss county-wide dispatch protocols. He takes swatting very seriously, Brenda. It wastes taxpayer money, it endangers civilian lives, and it puts his officers at massive risk." Brenda twisted her neck to glare at Jessica, her expensive mascara running in dark streaks down her flushed cheeks. You set me up. You're a thug. I am the sheriff of Monroe County," Jessica stated, letting the words drop like heavy stones. "And you, Brenda, are a danger to this community. You weaponized a police department over a parking dispute." Jessica looked at Officer Mitchell. "Read her rights and get her out of here. My husband and I were in the middle of a movie." "Yes, Sheriff," Mitchell replied eagerly. He guided Brenda toward the open back door of the cruiser. As he read the Miranda warning, Brenda finally stopped fighting. The reality of the cold steel around her wrists and the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off her tear-stained face seemed to finally shatter her delusion. She was ducked into the back of the cruiser, the door slamming shut with a resolute, heavy thud. The neighborhood tyrant, stripped of her clipboard and measuring tape, was finally just another booking number in the county system. The aftermath was swift, legal, and brutal. The local municipal police department did not take lightly to being used as pawns in a petty HOA vendetta. They formally charged Brenda with a felony count of making a false report concerning a catastrophic emergency, along with 2 misdemeanor counts of misusing the 911 system. When the HOA's legal counsel, Harrison and Associates, found out their client had swatted the active county sheriff, they dropped her like a radioactive stone. A formal letter of withdrawal was hand-delivered to her door the very next morning. Within 48 hours, an emergency neighborhood meeting was convened in the community center. Gary Linus, absolutely terrified of being implicated as an accessory to a felony, formally resigned as vice president and offered a full, groveling apology to the community. With Brenda sitting in a holding cell unable to post her initial bail, the residents held a unanimous vote of no confidence. The entire HOA board was dissolved and replaced by a group of normal, relaxed neighbors who immediately voted to rewrite the bylaws, stripping away the draconian parking rules and lawn measurements. Brenda eventually took a plea deal to avoid prison time, largely because her own defense attorney warned her that a jury pool pulled from Monroe County would overwhelmingly side with the popular, newly elected sheriff. She pleaded guilty to the misdemeanors, paid a massive $10,000 restitution fine to cover the cost of the police mobilization, and was sentenced to 500 hours of community service picking up trash along the county highway. Ironically, the judge mandated she wear a high-visibility neon green vest while doing it, the exact same color as the obnoxious sticker she had slapped on Jessica's Tahoe. Every now and then, when Jessica was driving her command vehicle to the northern precinct, she would spot Brenda on the side of Route 9. Stabbing at fast food wrappers with a trash picker, her designer sunglasses covered in highway dust. Jessica never honked. She just drove past, letting the justice system do its work. 3 months later, a massive commercial moving truck backed into Brenda's driveway. She sold her house quietly, taking a significant financial loss just to escape the county. I watched from my home office window as movers packed up her ridiculous beige golf cart, securing it in the back of the truck. Brenda left Whispering Pines in the dead of night. As for Jessica and me, we finally got our sanctuary. Without Brenda's toxic presence, neighbors actually started talking to one another. I went back to writing code, and Jessica went back to running the county. And the black Chevy Tahoe? It stayed parked right in the middle of our driveway, gleaming in the sun. A silent monument to the day the HOA dictator picked a fight with the wrong woman. Wow, talk about instant karma. Brenda really thought her HOA clipboard gave her more power than a sheriff's badge, and she paid the ultimate price for her arrogance. What would you have done if an HOA president swatted your house over a parking dispute? Let us know in the comments below. If you loved seeing justice served today, make sure to smash that like button, share this incredible story, and subscribe for more crazy real-life drama. See you next time.